If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what is your weird, most unexplainable event that has ever happened in your life? When I was 21, a bunch of my friends and I did magic mushrooms together. While we were tripping balls, I had a very vivid hallucination. I was on a rocking chair sitting opposite 3 of my friends. As I rocked back, I saw them as if they were in their late 50s, gray hair and wrinkly, and as I rocked forward, I'd see them normal and young in that moment again. I realized after a few times back and forth that I wasn't seeing the third guy when I rocked back, meaning to say I didn't see the old version of him. I went on for about half an hour from various positions in the chair and I just couldn't wrap my head around it, and it weirded me out. Being weirded out on a mushroom trip isn't exactly a great feeling, so I obviously got a bit hysterical and passed out. I vaguely told the guys about it the next day, and quite obviously, we all laughed it off. 8 months later, the friend I didn't see in that back and forth vision died in a motorcycle accident. This still makes me super uncomfortable, 8 years later. Dead of winter in southern Maine, 2 a.m. in the morning, hear my doorbell go off. Cliché, I get up to check it, turn on the floodlight. It's snowing but there's no prints. I go back to bed, it goes off again, but I hear my neighbor's voice. I get back up, check it, no prints, still nothing else. Go back to bed. Just starting to drift off. Tapping and breathing coming from my window. I tell me parents. They decide to check down the road anyway, thinking he might be running away even with no prints. Nothing on the road, no prints to signs of life, nothing. Wake up in the morning, check beside both my windows, no prints, no signs that anything had been there, nothing. Next couple of days I wake up hearing what sounds like hoof beats on the ground. No prints or nothing. Maybe unrelated. Summer following, I was out in the woods doing some bushcraft and weapon handling for airsoft. Hear a bunch of crashing in the woods, trees snapping, roaring. I start packing up, paying attention to the surrounding area. Start slowly walking back home, stopping, looking, listening and smelling. Nothing, but I hear what sounds like footsteps following me in the leaves a few feet to my left. Sprinted as soon as I saw the house, locked the doors. Went out the following day, no sign of snapped trees or limbs or anything else. No sign that I heard what I did. Parents still think I'm crazy, but I'm convinced there's something out in my woods. I regularly have dreams of my cat calling my name. Every time I wake up from one of these dreams, she is looking at me. Before anything creepy or profound could happen, the little shits start yowling for wet food. A friend piped up in my dream remotely, like 30 kilometers away, and I yelled at him to go away. Later that day he rang the house phone, I'm old, and told me that he'd woken me from my dream, the words I'd used and exactly what I'd been dreaming. Could never explain that. In Colorado there's a place called Rocky Flats that made the plutonium cores for nukes back in the day. Theoretically, it's shut down now. It's just off a highway that runs between Golden and Boulder, which both have colleges. One night back in college, I'm driving that highway at about 2 a.m. It's dark and completely deserted except for me, but that's pretty normal at that time. I crest a hill near Rocky Flats and there are a shitton of flashing lights surrounding a huge, slow-moving, flat truck-like thing with a big-ass covered bundle on it. We're talking something out of an alien UFO movie. This whole ensemble takes up most of the highway and is slowly moving towards me at maybe 5 miles per hour. I'm starting to freak out a bit cause it's 2 a.m. and I had a crazy night, and what the hell am I even seeing? When the loudest police warning horn I have ever heard got blasted at me along with a shitton of high beams. I did a U-turn in the middle of the highway and floored it. I have no idea what the duck they were moving, and I don't want to know. When I was in the 3rd grade, I remember waking up in the middle of the night and seeing the silhouette of a woman standing in my door. She definitely wasn't my mom, and I just stared at her for a bit, a little scared but not scared enough to really do anything, lol. Eventually, I heard a voice in my head, that wasn't mine, say she won't hurt you. So I almost immediately went back to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, I told my mom about what happened, and I guess earlier that morning before I was awake, both of my brothers said they saw the same woman at their door, but didn't hear the voice. We all physically described the same woman, and she looked eerily similar to our great-grandmother that died before any of us were born. My mom was freaked out, my brothers and I just kind of thought, that's weird, and didn't dwell too much on it, lol. This happened over 5 years ago now. My sister, 9 at the time, and I, 14 at the time, shared a room, with our beds next to each other. Normally our beds were tilde 4 feet apart, but they ended up being directly next to each other one night, probably because at the time, she was constantly doing gymnastics on her bed which would push the mattress. That night, I dreamt of a glass doll with long, dark hair. I remember feeling like I needed to protect it. I tried my best to keep it safe, promising it would be okay. But as I said these words, the doll's hair began falling out. I dropped the doll and it shattered. With the help of doctors, the doll was glued back together, and her hair grew back. When I woke up, I felt like crying. I didn't understand why I had that dream. I noticed my head had left my pillow at some point, and it was against my sister's head. When she finally woke up, she told me about her dream. It was the same. By this point I was totally freaked out, but she didn't believe me when I told her. I guess she thought I was messing with her. 6 months later, my sister was diagnosed with cancer. She ended up losing all her hair. And like the dream, her hair grew back and she got better. She doesn't remember this happening, and I'm still just confused about it all. In a way, I'm thankful for the dream because I got to somewhat emotionally brace myself for what was to come. I don't really tell anyone about it because it doesn't seem real, and I'm pretty sure I'd sound crazy lol. My girlfriend had a black stone heart ring she'd wear when I met her, but it would occasionally somehow fall off, despite being a tight fit, only to be found in odd places days later. Eventually she tied it on a leather strap and gave it to me to wear around my neck. It was a very tight fit over my head as it was a bit short. It was an effort to get it on or off, but we joked that at least I wouldn't lose it. One day we were packing up the family holiday home we'd sold, 2 hours from home, and while loading furniture into the trailer I must have snapped the tight strap and lost it. We only realized halfway home. Searched the trailer as we unloaded but no sign. We'd sold the holiday house so no one we knew could even go look for it, so we finally accepted this time it was lost for good. 2 years later my dad was mowing the lawn on the ride on at home, and he went to our paddock to empty it. He got off, emptied the clippings. But when he got back on and reached for the gear stick, something sharpish grated his grip. The ring was sitting balanced on the top of the gear stick, the leather string wound down the gear lever, but still intact, not snapped. He was alone in the middle of the paddock. We have no idea how it got there 2 years later, 150 kilometers from where it was lost. I asked my now wife where it came from originally. She found it in a kooky little pop-up shop of witchy type things. It was the only ring there, and it was also the only second-hand item they had for sale. The kicker here. I put it in my wooden box of special items so we'd never lose it again. I went to get it to show someone a few years ago and wasn't there anymore. I already put in a story of my own, but my dad has a story that's just a tad bit more chilling. Quite some time ago, in the early 2000s, my dad worked in a fancy interior design company. He still does, but in a different one. He told me that at one point, when I was still a toddler, his boss rejected a job application from a woman who claimed to do voodoo. Apparently she got very angry and cursed the company over the phone, or said she did at least. That was weird, but weird people exist, so no one was really worried. Then a little while later my dad had a nightmare that he went to the door of the company and it said it was closed due to the loss of an employee. Once again, weird, but he didn't really pay attention to it. Not long after that his coworker died in her sleep because she was pregnant and the weight of her child had apparently blocked off a major artery. After that my mom had a miscarriage. I was always convinced I would have had a brother, but according to my parent the gender was unknown. Some years later the boss's son died in his sleep due to a stroke. That concludes all the employees at the time of the curse. I know it might just be a coincidence, but I still think it's scary that everyone who worked there lost a child. Yikes. I have told this before, but here it goes. My aunt had just rented a nice house by the beach for us to spend a vacation. I invited one of my friends, let's call her Elle, to spend a weekend there with me. We were teenagers. I was like 13 and she was 11, I think. So the day goes by and we're having fun in the pool when my mom comes and says that she'd make hot dogs for dinner, and we get out of the pool. We enter the house, and while everyone is sitting at the table making their hot dogs, I decide to go to my room to do something, don't remember what. So I go upstairs. Room was on the second floor, and I enter my bedroom. The design of the bedroom was like this. When you enter the bedroom you can see the bed against the wall less than 1 meter from the door, and right by the side of the door was a giant-ass mirror. I enter the bedroom and feel something is off for some reason, so I sat at the bed and look around, then my eyes went for the mirror by the door. In the mirror, watching me, was Elle sitting on the bed where I should have been. She was pouting her lip for some reason and I looked at her for a good moment before running downstairs. That night I felt sick, had a fever and vomited several times. Then the morning came by and I was healed. Again, this could have been my mind's playing tricks on me, but it felt real as duck. Me and a friend saw a teeny tiny person. This was in the 90s and there was a really nice pub about a mile from where my friend Jason lived, and the walk there from his house took us along one of the canals. This was in England, the West Midlands to be precise. One evening, I'd gone over to his house, we'd walked over to the pub, had a couple of pints, something to eat, and were on our way back. It wasn't late, early evening and still a decent amount of light. We're walking down the track beside the canal when we hear a splash in the water behind us. Turning around, we see, about 40 feet away, the ripples of something moving through the canal towards the bank. Now both of us were keen birdwatchers at the time, so we were guessing it was something like a coot or a moorhen. So we were both pretty ducking shocked when what looked like a tiny little naked-ass man, about 8 inches tall, climbed out of the water, shook himself off and dashed into the hedgerow. We were both frozen for a few moments before we headed to the spot where the little man had gotten out of the water. Didn't find any trace of him. We got back to Jason's place and spent a couple of hours trying to rationalize it, but there was no other animal or bird that we could think of that we might mistake for a tiny person. I've tried to get people to believe me on this for years and no one will, but here it goes. Now, for context, I was 8 at the time and my dad was in the military, so we moved a lot. Well, I distinctly remember an entire 3-month period of living in an apartment while we were moving around. I can remember the entire layout, the things I did and others said, and various other things. The weird part? No one else who was there, my brother and my parents, remembers it, and no matter how much I describe to them things they did, said or show them some items that they bought while they were there, they just seem incapable of remembering it. And whenever I ask questions like, well, where did you buy that from, then? Or, where were we that spring, then? I never get a straight or even offhand answer. They always dodge the question. It's been bothering me for years. I used to live in these 2-story townhouse-like apartment complexes when I was around 12. Each townhouse had a door on the left and door on the right, Unit A, Unit B. We lived in Unit B and my bedroom window was front of house above our door, 2nd story. I was dropped off at night after a sleepover and my ride pulled away. Just as I looked up from getting my duffel bag off the sidewalk, I noticed embers or sparks falling slowly from my window, like a shitload of them, and I even stuck my hand out and caught one. It burned. I rushed inside and ran upstairs, but my window was closed and locked and my mother was the only one home in the master bedroom downstairs. Freaked me out cause there was no burning smell outside or inside, so I slept on the couch that night. When I was around 10, my younger brother and I used to always have sleepovers in the living room. We would pull out the bed that was in the couch and watch movies while eating junk food. Then we'd both fall asleep and one of my parents would eventually come and turn off the TV and make sure we were both covered by blankets. During one of these sleepovers, after my mom had tucked us in, I was woken up by what sounded like 2 people having a hushed conversation. Like you can hear people are talking, but it's just far enough away that you can't actually understand what they're saying. The whispers sounded like they were coming from the entrance of the living room. My living room was small, and I listened for around 10 to 15 seconds when one of the voices says, "Shh, shh, she's awake." I opened my eyes and there was nothing there. Turns out my brother had something like that happen to him in one of our previous sleepovers. I asked my mom to keep the TV on after we fell asleep from then on. For a year after my great-grandmother died, weird shit happened around our house. Cutlery would randomly fall into the sink, our computer would turn itself on in the middle of the night. My dad's headlights on his car would flash, and while he was at work, slushy cup lids would fly off the shelf. He worked at a petrol station. My dog started barking and whimpering at a cabinet that had an old portrait of her in it. It was getting really eerie. One night I was in bed and felt an arm grab me around my waist. That's how my great-grandma would greet people. Another time, different house. I was chatting to my dad with my back facing the hallway. My dad suddenly went white, his eyes like saucers. I asked what's wrong? He said he saw a black shadow go down the hallway. He immediately tried to explain it away, as he's skeptical when it comes to paranormal stuff. But he looked genuinely terrified. I lived in a really old house when I was younger. Let me preface by saying I'm an atheist and don't believe in ghosts. Well, one year around Christmas I was gaming in the living room and I heard a ball fall off the Christmas tree. No biggie, right? It just was on there poorly and eventually fell. Well, after a break in my game I got up to put the ball back on the tree. There was absolutely nothing on the ground. 10 minutes later a lamp turns off. Bulbs die, whatever, right? Well, the light was actually switched off and I had to physically switch it back on. It was the weirdest shit. I later found out that a little girl lived there many years prior and was killed by a car trying to cross traffic in front of the house. Now I still don't believe in ghosts, but I've got no explanation for what happened. I have a few short ones. 1. When I was about 12 years old my family moved to a new neighborhood. The houses were brand new, sitting atop new land even. Using the process of digging up land from lakes to pile it onto itself, making new land. My new bedroom was pretty big and facing the street, but as soon as I set foot in the new room I felt uneasy. I tried to explain it to my parents hoping for a solution, but I was just being silly according to them. A few months later I made a friend and invited her over to play at my house. I didn't tell her about the uneasy feeling I always had in my own bedroom because why would I was just being silly. But, as soon as she set foot in my bedroom, she asked if we could play in a different room because she didn't feel good in my bedroom. 2. This one time when I was about 15 I think, I was sitting in the passenger seat of the car whilst my father was driving us somewhere, I don't remember. We were driving towards a T-crossing, and as we were going left, I saw a bicycle going way too fast along the bicycle path, but the strangest thing was, nobody was riding it. The bicycle was going very fast, on its own. I followed the bicycle with my eyes as long as I could, and when it passed a tree a bit further along, it just disappeared. 3. One day I was coming home from school, and I looked up at my bedroom window. This is the same house as mentioned in story 1. I saw someone sitting in front of the window and I couldn't quite make out who it was, but I waved because I assumed it was my sister. She didn't wave back. So I opened the door and walked to my bedroom, nobody there. I walked to my sister's bedroom, nobody there. The whole house is empty. As I stand in the living room I hear the front door opening. It's my sister coming home from her school. 4. I was camping with friends on this tiny island. It's so tiny, that you could stand on one end, throw a ball, and it would reach the other side of the island. We had all our tents set up at the one side with a camping fire in the middle sitting around it. I was facing the tents with my back to the empty half of the island. Some of my friends were in the tents and others sitting near the fire as well. I could see everyone in my line of vision. Suddenly, I feel 3 taps on my right shoulder. Slow taps, like how you would count in Mississippi's. But, I can still see everyone, nobody is missing, nobody could stand behind me to tap my shoulder. As I'm kind of freaked out I turn to see who touched me but nothing is there. As soon as I turned back around facing everybody I felt another tap and I noped the hell out of my seat and went in my tent. To this day I can't explain any of these. Look at your hand right now. Either one, doesn't matter. See where your thumb is? Good. Now imagine it on the other side of your hand. When I was a kid I went to a local beach that was having a massive sand sculpting competition when I saw an older man in a full-on 3-piece suit, light blue, and way too thick for the 90+ degree weather we were enjoying that day. But what caught my attention was his hand. The damn thumb was on the wrong side of the hand, and as I stared at it I saw it slowly turn transparent and fade out of the wrong position and fade into the correct spot. Followed soon after by a hit of vertigo before I lost the man in the shuffle of the crowd. Had a nice few days after not knowing if my thumbs were on correctly and being too afraid to ask anyone about it, but it carved the memory into my skull, and even after all these years it's one of the clearest memories I have of anything. Not sure what I saw that day, but I'm fairly certain I wasn't supposed to. Anyway, this subject already has a billion replies, so I doubt anyone will read this, but for those who do, have a good day and keep your thumbs where they should be. When I was a kid, my dad had been digging in the garden one day and kept on meeting resistance in a certain area. He decided to work around it, but me being a curious 11-year-old decided to find out what it was. I eventually dug up a couple of large blocks of stone, one of which had some vaguely indecipherable writing on it. I couldn't figure out what they might be, and Google wasn't a thing, so I just sort of left them sitting in the garden. Fast forward about a week, and me and my sister were woken up one morning by some loud bangs, which my sister said were coming from above her bedroom, on the opposite side of the house to mine. There was nothing but an attic above her room, so there was unlikely to be anyone up there, and both our parents were still asleep. Whatever made the noise was heavy enough to knock a picture of my sister's wall and freak her out enough that she went to stay with a friend for the next week or so. Over the next couple of weeks, we kept on hearing these bangs, only now they were coming from inside my sister's room, rather than above it, and all of them were very definite and rhythmic, like it was someone furiously banging their fist on the floor. This went on for about 2 weeks, with me, my sister, my dad and my friend all hearing this noise. They only ever happened when everyone was downstairs, so none of us could possibly be causing it. I still vividly remember the rhythm of the last set of bangs I heard when I was in the kitchen, directly below my sister's room, alone in the house with my friend. The only person who didn't hear all of this was my mom, who thought we were making it all up. Despite her skepticism, however, she called me into her room one morning while she was doing her makeup and told me to bury those stones I'd dug up. I did as she said, and sure enough, the banging stopped. I still to this day have no explanation for it, and even looking at old maps of the town shows nothing but farmland on the site of our house. My dad still lives in the house and I'm often tempted to dig those stones up again to see what happens. I was at my dad's house one night, out in the country, outside smoking a cigarette when I saw a UFO. It was about a half a mile away, to the west, just above the tree line. At first I thought it was two separate helicopters with lights on their blades because of how the lights were sort of oscillating. The lights gradually came together as it started moving in the direction of our house. It was at this time I began to realize that it was going to pass over me if I stay outside, so I booked it back in the house. I got a really good look at it through the window as it slowly passed over the house. It was maybe 10 feet above the treetops, not disturbing the trees at all and completely silent. It had multicolored lights shooting out from all over and sort of moving around. It flew about 400 feet until it stopped over the neighbor's house where it sat for a minute. Then it nearly instantly zipped at an angle up and to the northeast a good ways, then stopped again, and then it shot straight up faster than anything I've ever seen. Of course I can't say what it was, but it certainly didn't seem like anything close to a plane, helicopter or balloon. It had shape, dimension, texture, it was a physical thing. That's about as much as I can say. Truly unidentifiable. When I was a teenager I got really into fortune telling, as a form of entertainment, but I put on a good show, and my best friend bought me this pack of Titania's oracle cards. I practiced with these by doing readings for friends. I really liked the artwork on them, and people always read what they want into it. One day I did a 2-week ahead reading for my friend Richard. The man and the dog came up. I said this indicated a close male friend. Then the coffin card, I said don't worry, this usually means a period of waiting, it only means death if it's drawn next to the scythe card. I shouldn't have told him that. The next card was a scythe. The reading basically said a close male friend would die within the next 2 weeks. I tried to backpedal and say it could mean a new phase in your friendship, but I could see he was a bit upset by this. I felt awful, this was meant to be fun. Well, I caught up with Richard a couple of weeks later. His best friend had died. He and I kind of drifted apart as friends after that. It was a horrible coincidence. Out of all the strange things in life, I had a very spiritual dream one time that me and my dad were talking. I don't remember much, we were having a good time and then he just said goodbye. I instantly woke up and looked at the clock thinking I had slept all night. Time was around 3:30 a.m. Didn't think much of it and fell back asleep. Shortly after I woke back up around 7:30 a.m., I got a call from my uncle telling me my dad died at about 3:08 a.m. Death was completely random as he didn't have any underlying health issues that would have made me think about it enough to have a full dream about it. It was like we somehow spiritually connected and I knew what was happening even though I was about 300 miles away in a different state. I've only told a few people about it in person because I can't talk about it without choking up. I was at a pretty low point in my life on New Year's Eve. My girlfriend just broke up with me and I was sitting at home alone with basically nothing but my thoughts. Combined with my failing grades in college and just general depression, I was rough. So I did what you do in that situation and drank the better part of 2 bottles of whiskey. Only time in my life I've gotten properly blackout drunk. I woke up at 4 a.m., on the floor with my Walter P38 in my hand. I checked the chamber and there was a live round in there. The primer was struck, but it looked like a soft strike, so it didn't fire. I've owned that old pistol for years and never suffered a malfunction. I've probably put the better part of 8,000 rounds through it without ever having it jam, fail to fire, or anything else. The one time it ever malfunctioned was when I drunkenly tried to kill myself with it. I'm not a religious man by any stretch, but I sometimes wonder if I have a guardian angel that's a gun nut. A few years ago I was getting ready to go to my friend Dave's wedding. It was about a 5-hour drive, so I planned to stay the weekend. The wedding was on Saturday, so I planned on leaving Friday night and spending the night at my mom's, which was much closer to the venue. Friday after work I started to feel very sick. My stomach was turning inside itself. I felt a deep, almost burning in my chest and my arm. I had a really bad headache too. My eyes inexplicably started burning and watering. Being in my 20s at the time, I figured it was not worth the dollar going to the hospital. I live in America. I decided I would shower and rest, then drive to the wedding in the morning. I started taking a warm shower, but the heat made me feel even worse. I put the water on cold and stood in the shower for maybe 30 minutes. It didn't help much. I decided to try to sleep, and if I didn't feel better by morning I would go into the hospital. I laid in bed still feeling very, very sick, not able to sleep. I called my mom at about 8:30 p.m. and told her I might not come cause I'm sick. She said just try and get some sleep, but if I really feel worse I should see a doctor. A few more hours of agony went by and I was really getting ready to go to the hospital. I was searching up symptoms to see if I could maybe find out what's wrong with me. I've had headaches and stomach aches in the past, but the burning feeling in my chest and my arm was something I had never experienced before. Yes, I've had heartburn. It was not that. I couldn't find anything online that sounded even close to what I was experiencing. Long hours passed. It was about midnight and I felt worse than I've ever felt. I got up to wash my face with some cold water cause I was sweating and burning up. My stomach and head pain were still there but way overshadowed by the pain in my chest and arm. That's all I could feel. Just hot and burning. I looked at myself in the mirror and I looked like death. My eyes were almost glowing red. Seriously. Big dark circles under. My face was really pale and flushed. I'm Indian, so that freaked me out. I literally scared myself. That was the last straw. I was going to the hospital. I got dressed and grabbed my keys and headed for the door when my phone rang. Again, this is after midnight on a Friday. I looked and it was my friend Max from college, who I hadn't talked to in about a year. I thought it was weird or maybe a drunk dial, but I answered. I heard him crying pretty hard. He's about 6 foot 300 pounds, so it was really weird to hear him cry. I asked him what's wrong. He told me our mutual friend from college, Sam, had died that night. He overdosed on heroin. I asked him details and he told me he had been dead for hours before anyone knew. They were at a party and everybody just thought he was sleeping. They kept partying until somebody tried to wake him up and realized he wasn't breathing. I talked on the phone with Max a while. Then I sent texts and called a few more of our college friends to let them know what happened. After a few tough hours, I was ready for bed. I thought to myself, why am I wearing jeans and my shoes at 3 a.m.? Then I remembered. I totally forgot that I was about to drive myself to the hospital because all of my symptoms disappeared. I was really sad because I was good friends with Sam for years, but my headache and stomachache were gone. The burning in my chest and arm were gone. I went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror and the color returned in my face. My eyes were red from crying, but they were normal red, not creepy shiny red. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was very tired and went to bed. I went to the wedding and pretty much kept to myself. I didn't want to be a downer for Dave and his wife. I spent that night at my mom's and told her all about everything. I cried and she hugged me and said, John, God has been good to us. Sam was going through something we will all go through someday. Some feel immense pain and sadness in the end. Others go quiet and peacefully. Your friend went peacefully. I know because you took his pain. Any pain and sickness you felt, he didn't feel because you took that from him. He went peacefully knowing you ushered him home to his last stop. He knows it. God will have mercy on him. I love my mom very much, but I'm not religious. I still don't have an explanation for why I felt as sick as I did or why it just went away. I've had 2 family members and another friend die since Sam, and I didn't feel any pain or sickness the day of, so I'm not like ESP or anything. I still think about it and Sam a lot. I was home alone for the weekend and had to work for most of it. The family members I was living with had gone to visit other relatives hours away and were going to stay with them for several days. They are very religious while I am not. In the house were tons of pictures and figures of Jesus, but especially so in the living room. Near the front door there was this one picture in particular that was actually a postcard that one of them had received years prior. It always sat on a shelf near the entryway and it depicted Jesus in front of a sunset with his arms spread. I knew what this postcard looked like and knew there were no duplicates anywhere else in the house. I went to work like normal and didn't pay much attention to anything as I left. When I returned home that evening, I went about my routine as usual with the added bonus of being home alone and thus left to my own devices. It wasn't until I went to brush my teeth before bed that I noticed anything was amiss. The postcard I described was in the upstairs bathroom sink, far away from the front door where it normally sat, and could have in no way ended up there by anything other than human intervention. I checked downstairs and it was indeed missing from the shelf. My family was still hours away and hadn't come home during the time I was at work. There were no signs of anything wrong in the house and everything was still locked up. I still have no idea how one single postcard could end up in a completely different room on a different floor of the house while no one was home. It freaked me out and still gives me pause when I think about it now. I was on a study abroad in Iceland. I lived there for about 6 months, and then a month before we were supposed to leave, my boyfriend and I decided to take a trip around the island. We rented this crappy little car and planned on staying a few days in some of the small towns as we drove the ring road. We first drove from Reykjavik to a small village called Vik in the south where we stayed overnight. I really loved it there. It was a super calming place with these beautiful black sand beaches and mountains. The next day we were supposed to drive from Vik to Hopen where we planned on staying overnight. When we started to leave Vik, I began to get nervous. It felt so random. There was no reason for it at all. As we drove, my nerves were building and building. We eventually stopped in Yuxalaren, Glacial Lagoon, and I had a full-on panic attack. I felt like I could not breathe and that I needed to go back to Reykjavik. My boyfriend at the time told me we were super close to Hopen, we could just stay there and let me calm down, but I did not want to. I felt like I had to go back to Reykjavik right then. So we turned the car around and drove all the way back to Reykjavik the same day. My boyfriend was not happy. That was a 5 or 6 hour drive back for no reason. Once we were back in Reykjavik, I calmed down completely and went to sleep. The next day a volcano erupted under the Vatnajökull glacier, which was right where we were at the day before. It was the largest eruption in Iceland for the last 50 years. For a short period of time I worked with a group of investors, mostly family friends, to buy cheap houses and flip them. Nothing crazy, just very cheap properties that needed a lot of work, but had potential profit in them. One of the perks, /s, of the job was that I got to live in the house as we fixed it up. There was a townhouse in this community of townhouses that we bought super cheap at auction, like $12,000. The previous owner had a fire, and for some reason it wasn't covered and they, financially, lost the house. I asked around and got the vibe it might have been a meth lab type situation. Anyways, we stripped the house down to the studs and built the inside back from scratch. After the walls and flooring were done, I moved in to work on and oversee the remaining details. Insert the creepy. The home had always had a weird vibe. From the first viewing everyone kept making jokes about the oddly creepy vibe going on. You entered on the second level, and the first floor was a windowless cinder block garage, the kind with a single hanging exposed bulb in the middle. The second level was the communal part of the house, living room, kitchen, dining, etc., all BRs on the third floor. As creepy as the garage was, the third floor just felt off. During the day I had no problem working on the flooring, bathroom tile, painting etc., but come nighttime it just had creepy vibes. Friends would come over, and I would give them a tour, and I shit you not, every one of them would hesitate before climbing the stairs to the third floor and comment about a creepy feeling. Needless to say, I never slept on the third floor. I slept in what would be staged as the living room downstairs. As days and weeks passed, the creepy feeling just grew, to the point where I didn't even feel comfortable downstairs during the daytime. The house was more or less finished, and I was just living there while it was listed on the market. Sitting on my couch, my cat comes ripping down the stairs and around the corner, kind of like the zoomies everyone with a pet knows well, except she doesn't make a lap around the downstairs, she rips around the corner, and leaps on the couch and tries to hide behind me. Cue the sound of slow heavy steps coming down the stairs, an ice cold chill runs over me head to toe, my heart is pounding, I am certain no one else is in the house. Then from the opposite side of the room from the stairs, clear as day I hear a deep dog's growl. The growl is coming from feet away from, and in no way mistakable as coming from outside or the adjacent neighbors. I grabbed my keys off the table, and my cat and immediately walked out the front of my car and drove away. After the fact I sent a cleaning lady back to clean up any of my messes, and finish the house for future showings. She informed me after leaving that she would not come back to this house. Multiple realtors also left feedback about eerie feelings they and their clients had during showings. We sold the house a few weeks later to a single mother and her 2 children. They have now been in the house 10 years, no problems. When I was in college, I lost a notebook for an econ class. I searched my car, my house, the classroom, lost and found, even other rooms that I had classes in to no avail. I looked for probably 2 weeks before I hand copied my friend's notes before finals. The day of my final, I get home from taking the test, and my bright red notebook is sitting perfectly on my couch like it was waiting for me to find it. My mom passed away from her battle with breast cancer this past December while I was abroad with my grandparents. The night she died, I woke up at like 6 a.m. to go to the bathroom. However, when I sat down on the toilet, I suddenly had this feeling like I was gonna faint or puke or both. I've had a history of low blood pressure and have fainted before, but this was more intense than anything else I've experienced. I ended up laying on the floor waiting for it to pass, and eventually my grandma found me like that and had to help me back to bed. Now the feeling didn't end up leaving until later that morning at about 10 a.m. when my father called me to tell me she was gone. I didn't realize it then, but due to the 6-hour time difference my mom was dying/declared dead around the same time as my fainting episode. I was so incredibly close to my mom, to the point that even my sister has said that I'm my mom's kid and she's my dad's kid. It feels silly to say/write out, but I can't help but feel like what happened to me was the severing of the spiritual connection my mom and I had. It makes me both happy and incredibly sad to think about, considering being away from her when she passed was what I had always dreaded the most. So, when I was about 5, an elderly lady living across the street from our house died at around midnight. The ambulance couldn't get there till the following morning. And as I stood there in the balcony, I saw the dead body being wheeled out of the house and put into ambulance and driven away. That was the first time I saw somebody die. A couple of days after that I started showing some weird behavior. Like I would be playing and would suddenly completely space out, I would just sit there motionless, looking into nothingness and completely unresponsive. People would be shouting at me, tickling me, but nothing, I showed no response. This would last for a minute or so and then I would just snap back to normal. The thing is, I didn't know this was happening and my friends didn't think much of it, so no adult had a knowledge of this. Well, one Saturday morning I was over at a friend's house and this happened. Her mother got worried and when I snapped back, I had a slight fever and was feeling drowsy. She sent me home and told my mother what happened. She thought it might just be because of a fever. I was very tired and so took a nap when I got home. When I woke up, the same thing happened again. But this time it was slightly different. I kind of still remember what it felt like then. I could see, I could feel, but I couldn't respond. And this time I didn't snap back. I remember seeing my dad tickle my feet and me wanting to kick him but being completely helpless. So I was rushed to a hospital. Bunch of tests were done but they couldn't diagnose anything. Apparently everything was normal according to test results. I was in ICU for a couple days but there was no sign of any change. So they moved me out of it and kept me in observation. A day after being moved out of ICU, my cousin came to visit me and offered prayers and read scriptures and did those kind of things while next to my bed. And apparently that night my mother saw me turn. The next day I woke up. I was in observation for a couple more days but I was alright. I had no issues with moving or speaking, didn't space out anymore. Doctors had no clue what caused what I had or what cured me. Since then my family attributes this incident to the spirit of the dead woman, whereas I just find it weird. Not me, my father. From his perspective. When I was young, probably 12 or 13, my family lived in a small residential suburb. There was a street lamp right across the street from us that would shine into our living room window at night, so every night before we went to bed my father would draw the curtains. One night I woke up around 2 a.m. and went to the kitchen to get some water. As I passed through the living room I noticed a beam of light from the street lamp had made it through a small gap between the curtains and I had the urge to peek through. Standing under the street lamp was a tall man with a black cap, silver skin, and massive eyes, those huge bug eyes that you see in alien movies. He was standing there motionless, and staring right at me. I quickly ducked down behind my father's recliner. There was no way he could have seen me. The house was completely dark and I barely moved the curtains as I looked through. After a few minutes of sitting on the floor behind the recliner, I grew curious to see if the man had passed. I looked through the curtains again. Pressed firmly against the other side of the glass, inches away from my face, was the silver man with bug eyes, staring right at me. After a moment frozen in terror, I ran through the house towards my father's room and woke him up, quickly telling him what happened. He grabbed his shotgun and went outside to look around. He didn't find anyone, but there was a set of fresh footprints in the dew that had been collecting on the lawn. My father has recounted this story to me exactly twice, and even though it happened to him some 40 years ago, I could still see the goosebumps on his arms as he recalled the experience. Must have been 5th grade when I was sitting on the couch watching TV with my dad. As 10 p.m. rolled around my dad fell asleep in his lazy boy, as is the nature of fathers. With my dad asleep, I figured I would watch a little more TV before I turned in. While sitting there I heard, and I remember this so vividly, a clown's laugh coming from the room behind me. I was petrified, but eventually mustered the courage to poke my dad awake and tell him what happened. I don't blame the guy for shrugging it off as my imagination, but here I am 10 years later and I still firmly believe my ears were not playing tricks on me that night. When I was growing up, my dad and I would sit for hours and watch dragonflies. He and my mom divorced when I was 13 and he moved out of state and couldn't really support himself and a kid, so my mom got custody and moved us to a different state. The invitation was always open for him to visit but he never did, but we'd talk on the phone a few times a week to stay caught up. He'd gotten a rare kind of cancer in his vocal cords and was going to have something surgically removed in there. He called me a few days after the surgery and told me things were looking good but they were keeping him in the hospital because he had a fever after the surgery. I knew at that point that this was our last conversation. The next day, I was sitting in my truck before work with the window open and a dragonfly landed on my hand. It was November, so there shouldn't have been any around, and it felt like my dad was standing there. About 2 minutes later I got a call from his friend that was staying with him at the hospital that he had passed away about 5 minutes before I'd seen the dragonfly. I'm sure there's a good reason for this that I just can't think of, but one time, I was in a Discord call with a friend. I was sitting at the computer with a blanket over my shoulders. All of a sudden, feel my cat jump up and pulls the blanket off of my shoulders. She likes to climb up and sit on my shoulders sometimes, so I assumed she just jumped and missed, instead just taking my blanket off me. I told my friend, "Ugh, hold on, my cat just messed up my blanket," and took off my headphones to get up and take the cat out of my room. I look down, no cat. I look over at the door, it's closed. There's no cat in my room. Still have no idea what pulled the blanket off me with that much force. I was homesick sometime during HS, 11th or 12th grade. I was sitting in my computer chair playing Skyrim when my dog, who was usually contempt by himself and never one for affection, came into my room and laid down staring out my door. Me being alone and this not being his normal course of action, unnerved me a bit, so I closed my door and went back to playing. Not 3 minutes later I hear the voice of my mother calling my name, clear as day. She's a school teacher, so she would have been at work. Shitting myself, I try to be as quiet as possible and lower my TV all the way down to make sure I didn't attract whatever I heard and could hear more clearly, only to hear the bedroom door upstairs slam shut. Sat in my room and noped all day long in silence until my mom came home. I asked her if she was home earlier and denied it. One of the scariest moments of my life. When I was 6, my great-grandma passed away and myself, sister and mother went to her open casket and were saying goodbye. When we went to leave, the door was locked and we couldn't get out. We were stuck in a funeral home with our dead grandma. About 20 minutes later the receptionist found us and let us out. She asked what we were doing and we said that we got locked in. She looked at us and said the door doesn't have a lock on it. Mum's convinced that great-grandma didn't want us to leave.